Hello, everybody. Welcome to our short research interview today. Today, I'm delighted to introduce you to Nathan Howarth, who is an associate researcher at Oxford Brookes University, as well as an associate lecturer at the same institution. Nathan, you're also doing quite a lot of work at the University of Warwick, as I understand it. So it's great to have you here with us today. I appreciate how busy you are at the moment, juggling lots of different roles. Um, in particular, today you're here to talk to us about a paper that was recently published in Communication and Sport, titled An Analysis of Stakeholder Views on the Relationship Between Rugby Union, the Media, Masculine Infants' Views on Injury and Concussion. So welcome, and it's great to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, John, and it's lovely to get an opportunity to discuss this new paper.
Yeah, perfect. So in terms of the paper itself, I just wondered if you could start by talking a little bit about the rationale behind this work.
Yeah, so obviously as rugby has transitioned in from amateurism and sort of towards the professional realm, we've seen this increase in uptake in media exposure and also a change in the sort of attitudes towards rugby. It sort of reflects some of the societal changes around masculinity and how we've moved away from this acceptance of risk and risk almost at all costs. And one of the things within rugby that's obviously a massive part of their game is the collisions, the contact, but one of the consequences is concussion. And some of those issues around concussion previously have been downplayed or almost minimized. I myself has had a concussion and then post-concussion syndrome. And, you know, when I was playing, even only, we're talking 8 years ago when I received this, concussion wasn't a talked about topic. And so this research really looks at how there has been a transition of how concussion is presented in the media, challenges some of these notions of masculinity within the way in which rugby is presented and this contact sport, and actually moves us to some of the understandings of how the media can play a role in education and educating us around concussion.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Over the last few years in particular, we've seen a real boom in terms of the amount of discussion of concussion and head-related injuries in all sports, but obviously rugby in particular, as you say, because of the contact and collision elements. So, just in terms of how you went about investigating this project and the influence of the media, then, so what methods did you employ as part of this research?
So this was a survey that was given to rugby stakeholders, and they could have been from a fan background, players, coaches, and even referees, to give a broad analysis of some of the stakeholders. Clearly, they're not all the stakeholders within the game, but it allows us to engage them. And over 500 filled in the questionnaire, which gave some really interesting questions around what their perception of risk was, how the media play a role in sort of presenting that everyday risk, the understanding of how different forms of education are out there and whether or not they've been able to undertake that awareness, and some of the, you know, understanding what they understand as being concussion. It is not a talked about topic sometimes in rugby clubs. And you see that you have conversations with people that still bring out these misconceptions about a trivial injury or even in some regards, a completely wrong definition of concussion.
Okay, interesting. So, in terms, you kind of touched a little bit upon some of the findings in terms of how people understand concussion and some of the role that education can play in terms of addressing misconceptions. But if you could provide a quick summary of the key findings in terms of what you found in the paper.
So we found this sort of transition with masculinity. So this way of challenging that risk is acceptable. Although there is still caveats to that, and that's probably one of the key findings, is there are still people that find that risk is almost part of everyday life, and that the media is almost sensationalizing some of the risks. And actually there's this concept of us versus them, the rugby community versus the media. And actually this needs to be broken down, and I suppose where leading on to where we go next with this is that actually this is where media actually has to engage and inform rather than just be seen as attacking. And this is where some of the key findings is how we can engage those within the sort of the media sphere and on the rugby side to make sure that we're adequately presenting concussion as a risk, and being able to understand how that actually we are more cautious. One of the key findings is that overall the awareness of concussion is increasing through media exposure. Some of the discussions around how the media present things like HIA, the head injury assessment process in rugby, and even more poignant around the Euros recently and how the lack thereof of clear protocols and processes. And although we're not touching upon those, we can see the importance of actually having a clear media discourse in applying these. And this is what we've seen within rugby, is how that media discourse has allowed the general public and the stakeholders involved in rugby to really start to understand what's going on in the background of the game in terms of injury risk, and start to think about what could be acceptable. And actually then there's some really interesting points that have been teased out around acceptance of risk and who can accept that risk. Looking at particularly children, is it their parents that need to accept the risk? And can the children then be able to understand what they're getting themselves into?
Yeah, really interesting, and obviously there's been lots of discussion around risk acceptance in previous publications that some of our colleagues have been involved in as well. You also touched a bit on some of the implications around engaging with the media and the importance of media discourse and potentially shifting some of that discourse, or how the discourse has already shifted in some places over time. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about plans for media engagement. Are there any plans afoot in terms of working with the media?
So yes, so one of the other organisations involved in some of this space is the Concussion Legacy Foundation, and one of the things they run is a media course which looks at how those involved, whether that be journalists, live TV, live radio, can start to really engage and inform the audience and viewership around concussion, talk about its severity, talk about actually some of the mechanisms of recovery, and the need to differentiate, the need to think about these are professional environments, particularly that people are being talking about in this research around the professional end of rugby, that the luxury of a 15-year-old schoolboy game is they're not going to have a doctor on the pitch side. They're probably not going to have many people that understand the depths of concussion that they get within the professional end of the game. So some of these learning points are something that can be translated. And one thing we want to be able for people to recognise is those signs and symptoms when they're playing themselves, or they're watching their son, daughter play, and actually have that ability to recognise and remove, because that is the best tool for concussion recovery, is to remove themselves from the play and rest and recover adequately. And that's some of those discussions have been taking place, and it's really good to see that we ran, as part of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, ran our first media course earlier this year, and had over 30 journalists from the UK engage with that course. And so we can see that work's going to continue. And we've also got some work in the pipeline on how the media has portrayed the Euros, particularly within this current almost epoch of concussion media discourse, and how actually there has been this outcry for better protocols. And actually, the media is a key platform to springboard these changes, because actually, as seen in this research, it's ultimately the stakeholders that are watching and engaging with the media that are those that are digesting the sport itself, and those are the ones we want to keep hold of and keep involved in the sport.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Nathan. And it's great to hear that you've already done some work in terms of engaging with the media and some media training work, and to have 30 journalists already involved is fantastic. And I'll be very interested to see how reporting, what that looks like from the Euros. Obviously, we had Dr. Keith Parry on a few episodes ago talking about the Karius incident from the Champions League final a few years ago. So it'll be great to get some more update conversations around potential shifts, hopefully, in media reporting related to head injuries in sport.
I was going to say, watch this space. Yeah. Me and Dr. Keith Parry are on it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today, Nathan. I'm going to post a link to the article in the description that accompanies this video. The article itself is open access, I believe, so hopefully that will prompt more people to engage with the paper. And I look forward to hearing some further updates from you and Keith in due course.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you very much for having me, John.
Thank you, Nathan. Take care.